They never thought I was watching. I was the quiet one, the background, the extra chair at the table. They laughed around me, they planned things without me, and when they did remember my presence, it was to assign blame. I grew up choking on silence, swallowing screams. The air in our house always smelled of sour wine and cold meat. Parties I wasn't invited to. Gifts I wasn't allowed to open, punishments I didn't deserve. No one ever noticed when my bruises changed color. No one remembered who had thrown what. They had their reasons, their alliances, their rotations of cruelty. One day it was her slaps, another it was his curses. The worst days were when they pretended nothing had happened. Those were the days that made me feel insane. Like I was haunting a family that didn't even know I had died a long time ago. They said I was ungrateful. I wasn't. I remembered everything they gave me. Cold dinners, locked doors, and lessons in shame. I learned quickly to hide my emotions. Crying only gave them fuel. Talking back invited a deeper cut. So I smiled. I acted small. I took their side when they fought each other. That was how I survived. But survival wasn't enough. Not anymore. The first time I felt real power was when I held a dead bird in my hands. It had crashed into the glass window during one of those long silent mornings where no one asked where I was. It was still warm, limp, a smear of blood on its beak. I didn't cry for it. I didn't bury it. I opened it. I studied the inside of something that once sang. I watched it stop being anything at all. That night, I didn't flinch when the yelling started again. I just lay in the dark, thinking about the way the bird's insides had felt. Fragile, breakable, beautiful. It became a ritual. The dead things came to me, mice, insects, once a kitten I found on the roadside. I never killed them. Not then. I just used what the world handed me. Dissected. Understood. Respected. It was more attention than anyone in that house ever gave me. That's when I started keeping a notebook. Not for the dead animals. For them. The family. Every fight. Every betrayal. Every twisted smile. I logged it all. They made it easy. He cheated on her for years. She knew and got even by sleeping with his brother. The oldest one, golden boy, had a gambling problem. The youngest, sweet on the outside, hurt animals when he thought no one was watching. I knew all their secrets. They left their evidence lying around like trophies. Text messages, phone calls, bottles hidden behind bookshelves. I saw it all. I memorized it. And I waited. It started with the inheritance. Not a lot, but enough to ignite them. Enough to expose what was already rotten. The will was written years ago, and it didn't include me. Of course not. I was the mistake. The burden. The unwanted one they never aborted. But they didn't count on me knowing about the second will. The newer one. The one I watched our grandmother sign before she slipped into her final coma. I had helped her write it. She had whispered things to me, half in dreams, half in fear. She saw them clearly near the end. Saw what they were. What they did to her. What they did to me. I never submitted that will. Not right away. I let the first one stand. I watched them tear each other apart over scraps. Then, once the dust settled, I mailed copies of the real one to each of them. Certified. Signature required. I filmed each reaction through the camera I'd planted in the hall mirror months earlier. Screams. Slaps. Threats. The unraveling began. They called me. Begged. Then threatened. Then begged again. But I didn't respond. I just sent more. Photos. Screenshots. Recordings. Proof of everything I knew. The affairs. The abuse. The money laundering. The dog buried in the backyard. I had folders on each of them. They began turning on each other. The oldest accused the father of forging signatures. The mother accused the youngest of theft. The youngest snapped and spilled everything in a drunken live stream. The family name, once so polished, began to rot in public. It wasn't enough. I wanted them broken. The next step took longer. I moved out quietly. Changed my name. Took online courses in psychology. Forensics law. I learned how to hide my tracks. I learned how to read people better than ever before. Then I created the shell companies. One for each of their sins. I made it look like they were doing it again, embezzling, fraud, illegal trades. I used their own habits against them. Planted just enough evidence. Left the right breadcrumbs. It was so easy to manipulate the systems they already abused. They taught me everything by accident. The audits came fast. He lost his job first. Then the mother's nursing license was suspended. The youngest had a restraining order filed against him by a former classmate who suddenly remembered an incident from school. I didn't make anything up. I just amplified the truth, pressed on the bruises they'd left behind. Still, it wasn't enough. Pain needs to be personal. So I went home. The house was quieter now. The parties had stopped. The curtains stayed closed. I saw the cracks in the paint, the mold under the sink, the rot in the wood. I smiled. I asked to stay for a few weeks. Said I was trying to forgive. That I needed time. They welcomed me like ghosts. Pale, nervous, afraid of their own daughter. They didn't say it, but they knew. Or suspected. The air changed when I walked in. Like they could smell blood. I was polite. I cleaned. I cooked. I watched. Then I started removing things. Not big things yet. Just pieces. A single family photo. A box of heirlooms. Birth certificates. Jewelry. I burned them in the basement furnace one by one. I kept the ashes in glass jars. Labeled them. Took pictures. Left the labels where they would find them eventually. Then came the food. I changed it. Slightly. Enough to cause stomach problems. Just herbs and powders. Things I ordered from websites with disclaimers in Latin. They blamed stress, anxiety, age. I smiled. I offered to make tea. They drank it. Every night. When the father started vomiting blood, I cried at the hospital like a good daughter. They couldn't trace it. They never will. I watched them fall apart from the inside out. Organ by organ. Memory by memory. I left cryptic notes in their mailboxes. Messages typed with gloves. Photos of things they forgot they'd done. They started locking their doors. Sleeping with knives. Suspecting each other again. The mother accused the youngest of poisoning her. The youngest accused the oldest of stealing pills. The oldest ran. Left the country. The police began investigating. Quietly. Nothing stuck. Yet, I still wasn't done. Because I remembered the worst thing. The thing no one ever talked about. The real reason I was never wanted. The night I found the old family camcorder. The footage. The proof. But that's for part 2. The camcorder was hidden in the attic beneath boxes of dusty ornaments and rotting books. Long forgotten relics of staged perfection. It wasn't labeled. Not marked in any way that could warn someone off or hint at what it held. It was by accident that I found it. A leaking pipe had warped the ceiling, and I was sent up with a bucket to make myself useful. Typical. I was always only called when something needed to be done that no one else wanted to touch. I didn't open the camera at first. I just stared at it for hours, letting my fingers rest on the buttons, breathing in the stale air that clung to the insulation. Something about the weight of it felt wrong, too heavy for plastic, too full for silence. When I finally pressed play, the whirring sound echoed in the hollow crawl space like a scream muffled in pillows. The footage began jittery, unfocused, the lens bouncing between legs and carpet. Laughter in the background. Slurred words. Faces I recognized, faces I hated. Faces that had been kind to strangers and cruel behind closed doors. Then the camera steadied. A child came into view. A little girl. Me. I froze. My breath caught somewhere between lungs and throat, and for a second I thought I would throw up. There I was, 6 years old, in a party dress 2 sizes too small, surrounded by shadows that laughed and touched and whispered. What followed was 23 minutes of footage so vile, so unforgivable, that it hollowed out the last of whatever innocence I had buried inside. I don't remember standing. I don't remember dragging the boxes aside. All I remember is the heat in my face and the shaking in my hands and the absolute clarity that burned through me like acid. They had recorded it. They had saved it. They had kept it like a souvenir. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I took the tape, wrapped it in 3 layers of plastic, and hid it in my room. I watched it again that night. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. I needed to know the extent of their crimes. I needed to catalog every movement, every voice, every breath that hung in that filthy air. And I did. I wrote it all down in the black notebook with the broken spine, the one I had once used to document bruises and slurs. Now it held the truth. The full, sickening truth. The next day I emptied out the attic. Claimed there had been water damage. tossed the moldy boxes into the truck, smiling as they watched me load up their past. They never suspected. They never cared enough to even ask what I had seen. Their ignorance was a gift. And I used it. The tape didn't go to the police. Not yet. The justice system was slow, sloppy, inconsistent. I needed something precise. Something poetic. They had taken my childhood and reduced it to footage. Now I would reduce them to headlines, to shame, to silhouettes behind cold cell bars. I uploaded segments anonymously, masked their faces just enough to escape takedown, but kept the horror raw. Forums erupted with speculation. True crime addicts dissected every detail. The internet became my army. They didn't know who they were defending, but they hated what they saw. The family name began trending. Old acquaintances started talking. Neighbors who had never noticed anything began recalling strange sounds, locked doors, missing pets. The image they had curated for decades shattered in a matter of days. Still, I wasn't satisfied. Shame wasn't enough. They needed to feel it. So I confronted her first. The matriarch. The woman who used religion as a weapon, who had held my face underwater as a baptism, and called it salvation. I found her in the garden, clipping dead roses like they were the only things she could still control. I stood behind her silent until she turned and flinched. She tried to speak, but I handed her the envelope instead. A still image from the tape. A freeze frame of her smile. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She crumpled. The next day, the father received his. A package with a single USB drive and a note. "Look what you've built." He didn't come out of his room for 3 days. I could hear the sounds, glass breaking, pacing, the dry heaves of a man choking on his own rot. I hoped he remembered everything. I hoped he saw himself in every second. I left the youngest for last. He always thought he was above it all. The charming one. The innocent one. But I remembered the kitten. I remembered the way he smiled after crushing its spine behind the shed. I remembered the way he offered me candy to stay quiet. I remembered the glee in his eyes when he held me under the stairs and made me promise never to tell. I remembered everything. His envelope didn't contain footage. His contained bones. Small ones. From my collection. Cleaned, polished, arranged in a velvet-lined box like jewelry. I left it on his pillow while he slept. The screams echoed through the hallway like sirens. He tore his room apart looking for cameras. There were none. I wanted him to believe I was everywhere. And still I wasn't done. The final act needed witnesses. I created a digital folder titled Confessions. Inside were transcripts, diary pages I forged in their handwriting, audio clips spliced from old voicemails. The story I told was brutal, honest, layered in years of pain. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the countless others like me who had been silenced by people who wore family as a mask. I emailed the folder to journalists, lawyers, victim advocacy groups. I made sure it would never be erased. And when it went public, I disappeared. Cut my hair. Burned my ID. Bought a bus ticket to nowhere. I left the house one last time with nothing but the notebook and the camcorder. They would never find me. But they would never be free either. The mother tried to overdose. The father fled the country. The youngest was arrested 2 weeks later for possession and assault after attacking a stranger he thought was me. But the one who shocked me most was the golden child. The one who had been absent through it all, who had always been too busy or too far away to notice what had rotted under the surface. I had written him off as complicit through silence. But he came back. Publicly. Stood on camera and admitted it all. His own failures. The crimes he had witnessed. The suspicions he'd buried. He cried. Real tears. Not for himself. For me. I watched the interview in a motel room 2 states away. I felt nothing. Because it was too late. He had known. He had chosen not to help. His repentance didn't absolve him. Nothing ever would. I kept the notebook close. I read it every night like scripture. Each word was a promise kept. Each page, a step toward reclaiming the life they tried to erase. But one thing remained. One final act. And I was ready. They never dreamed I would survive them. But survival was never the goal. I didn't want to outlive what they had done. I wanted to become it. Every lie they told, every bruise they left, every hour I sat locked in my own home, choking on their silence, I took it all, devoured it, turned it into something sharper, cleaner, weaponized. And now, as they unraveled one by one, I watched, not as the child they tried to break, but as the architect of their ruin. I thought it would feel like peace. It didn't. It felt like blood humming in my ears, like static under my skin, like I had barely started. They deserved more. Not just pain. Exposure. I wanted them remembered, not as pillars of the community, not as devout parents, not as self-made survivors, but as monsters. I wanted their faces etched into every dark corner of the internet, every police file, every tabloid, every whispered story that began with, "Did you hear about that family?" So I made it happen. I rented a small apartment under a fake name, a windowless studio with peeling paint and a bathroom that smelled like mildew. Perfect. No distractions. Just me, a laptop, and everything I'd been building for the past decade. I reopened the files, sorted the evidence, formatted it into timelines, graphs, documents so clean they looked court-ready. Then I made the site. Not just any blog. A digital archive. A monument to suffering. I coded it by hand. Password protected. Layers of encryption. Hidden unless you knew where to look. But once you found it, there was no turning away. Photos, recordings, medical reports, financial documents, therapy notes, anonymous testimonies from neighbors, classmates, extended relatives. Most of them didn't even know they'd contributed. They'd left traces online, in forums, comment sections, digital footprints I tracked and stitched together like a forensic surgeon. And at the center of it all, the footage. The tape I'd found in the attic, broken into segments, each one prefaced by typed transcripts, context, history. Not to shock. To document. To expose the lineage of abuse like a diseased family tree. It went live on a Sunday morning. By Monday night, the traffic overwhelmed the server. By Tuesday, it hit the dark web. By Thursday, it was being discussed on national news. Politicians denounced it. Activists amplified it. Anonymous declared support. People were horrified and then addicted. They couldn't stop scrolling. Couldn't stop watching. The story had hooks now. Teeth. Fangs. And I wasn't anonymous anymore. Because I added one final file, my own voice. One long audio recording. No name. Just pain. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I spoke clearly, slowly, like a surgeon reciting anatomy. I listed what they did. What they allowed. What they destroyed. And what I became because of it. I ended the recording with 5 words. Now the world knows everything. I thought they might kill themselves. But they didn't. That would have been too clean. The mother tried to sue me. She failed. The case was dismissed before it reached court. Too much evidence, too many witnesses now willing to speak up. Her reputation burned like dry paper. Every nursing license she ever held was revoked. Her face, once on brochures, charity boards, Sunday school newsletters, now appeared on exposés about generational trauma, emotional manipulation, religious gaslighting. The father stayed quiet. For a while. But predators don't know how to disappear. He moved states, changed his name, got a job at a gas station under the table. It took me less than a week to find him. I mailed him a copy of his old signature from the forged checks. Then a photo of himself in front of the school he used to volunteer at. The final envelope held a single word, printed in 72-point font. Confess. 2 days later, he walked into a police station and gave a statement. It didn't match the files. He lied, blamed it all on others, claimed he had no idea. But the damage was done. His fingerprints were on everything now. His name re-entered the database. No escape. The youngest was already spiraling. The media attention only fed his paranoia. He believed everyone was watching him and they were. His mugshot was shared on message boards. His old tweets unearthed. Friends cut him off. Old girlfriends came forward. Then coworkers. Then clients. Each one had a story. Each one added weight to his descent. He started live streaming. Rambling rants. Wild accusations. Bloodshot eyes. Ticking faster than a time bomb. And then one night, he vanished. They found his car in a lake 3 weeks later. Empty. No body. Part of me hoped he was dead. Another part knew better. Cowards always find places to hide. The golden one, the brother who confessed on camera, surprised me again. He came looking for me. Not with a gun or a lawsuit. With a letter. He left it at the apartment building I had long since vacated. The landlord, confused and curious, forwarded it to the P.O. box I use now. I read it once, then burned it. I remember only fragments. Apologies, admissions, memories half remembered and half erased. He said he wanted to help me heal. Said he wanted to face justice with me. Said I was brave. He didn't understand. This wasn't about healing. This wasn't about bravery. This was about reckoning. There's no comfort in justice. No soft moment where everything makes sense and you breathe easy again. There's only the grinding weight of knowing you did what had to be done. That you were willing to burn everything, including yourself, to make sure they never touched another soul. I thought that would be the end. But then the letters started coming. From strangers. Hundreds of them. Emails. Messages. Handwritten notes. People who had seen themselves in my story. Girls who had been locked in basements. Boys who had been touched by uncles. Adults who had buried things for decades. Until one website dragged them to the surface like corpses from a frozen lake. They thanked me. They cried in their messages. Some were angry. Others were afraid. Many had never told anyone before. I printed them all. Bound them in volumes. 27 books so far. I keep them stacked in a suitcase under my bed, labeled proof. Not of their guilt, but of the disease they carry. The inheritance they tried to pass down. I stopped it with me. I scorched the bloodline so nothing could grow from it ever again. And yet sometimes I still dream of the house. Of the creaking floors, the dripping faucet, the way the light never reached the basement corners. In the dream I walk through the halls calmly. The family is there, frozen in place like mannequins. Mouths open, eyes wide, skin rotting in slow motion. Pass each one. I whisper something they can't hear. Then I reach the attic. The camcorder is waiting. Still warm. Still recording. And I press play. Again. And again. And again. The walls were waiting for me. I could feel it the second I stepped onto the cracked path leading up to the front door. The way the wood of the porch creaked, not with age but with recognition. As if the house itself remembered the weight of my childhood footsteps. Every inch of the property breathed with old secrets, with silence too heavy to carry anymore. It had been empty for months, but not empty in the way abandoned things are. It was dense, swollen with memory, swollen with rot. No one had cleaned up. Of course not. The family name was ash now, smoldering across news feeds, buried in tabloid headlines, torn apart by online forums like meat thrown to starving dogs. The foreclosure notice still flapped on the front door. Half torn, like even paper couldn't stand to stay here anymore. I didn't use a key. I didn't need one. The lock had been broken for years. Just like everything else inside. The air hit me like a blow to the chest. Mildew. Old wine. Dust layered over sorrow. The furniture was gone, sold or stolen or burned. But the bones were still here. Scorch marks on the walls from old arguments, stains on the carpet they had tried to pretend were wine spills, holes in the drywall from fists no one remembered throwing. Every surface told a story they tried to hide. Every cracked tile beneath my feet whispered in the voice of the girl they buried inside this place. I didn't pause to cry. I had no tears left. Only purpose. I brought everything with me. My notebook, the black one, still soft at the corners from all the years I had gripped it too tightly. The drives. The files. A box of printed screenshots, photographs, confessions I'd collected from others who had seen my archive and sent their own pieces of hell. And the letters, the hundreds of letters from survivors, from strangers, from ghosts who lived in other bodies. I brought them all. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was for all of us. I started upstairs, where the bedrooms were still full of their echoes. I nailed the photographs to the walls, one by one like sacred paintings. Images of bruises, of torn dresses, of broken doors. Evidence. Not just mine. They're from decades. I pinned the youngest's texts on his old closet door. I taped the father's forged signatures across the ceiling where he used to stare after his drunken blackouts. The mother's prescriptions, fake IDs, donation scams. I laid them out across the vanity mirror where she used to paint her face and lie to the world. I made an altar out of their crimes. Then I poured the gasoline. I worked slowly, room by room, line by line, like poetry written in fire. I drizzled it over the floorboards that used to creak, when I snuck out of my room to vomit in the middle of the night. I soaked the rug in the hallway where my hair had once been yanked from my scalp. I splashed the baseboards of the guest room, the one they used to pretend was mine when visitors came, even though I had slept in the attic for years. Downstairs, I opened the suitcase. The letters were soft in my hands. Hundreds of pages, some typed, some scrawled in childlike handwriting, some barely legible through the ink-blotted tears. I read each one silently as I laid them on the living room floor. The story of a boy locked in a closet for wetting the bed. A woman who watched her sister disappear after telling the truth. A teacher who had buried her own abuse for 40 years. They weren't just testimonies. They were monuments. Living memory. And I set them gently, carefully, with reverence, like laying flowers on graves. Then I took out the camcorder. Still functional. Still whole. I had cleaned it the night before. Charged the battery. I placed it on the mantel, facing me, like an old witness called to testify one last time. I hit record. And I spoke. I didn't scream. I didn't tremble. I didn't flinch. My voice was even cold, heavy like iron. I said everything. Not just what they did, but what they made. How pain fermented in the quiet. How neglect grew fangs. How silence wasn't just complicit, it was fatal. I confessed too. I told the world what I'd done to them. How I had waited. How I had planned. How I had broken them, piece by piece. And why it was never revenge. It was balance. They had sown chaos. I had returned the favor. I looked into the lens for a long time after I finished speaking. No blinking. No forgiveness. Then I turned it off. I didn't take the footage with me. I left it there inside the house. A black box for the investigators, for the scavengers, for the ones who would try to explain the ash. It was time. I lit the first match in the attic. The place where I had once hidden for days with nothing but an apple and a notebook. I dropped it on the floor and didn't look back. The fire hissed at first like it couldn't believe it was being set free. Then it roared, leaping across the rafters like a beast long starved. I moved room to room, lighting each trail. By the time I reached the living room, the heat was thick enough to make my skin scream. But I stood there one last time, surrounded by the flames, breathing in the death of what had raised me. This was not my childhood home. This was my tomb. And I was burning it from the inside. I walked out slowly, calm, smoke curling behind me like a veil. The neighbors didn't call for help. I saw them watching from their windows, their porches, their gardens. Some cried. Some stared with open mouths. None of them moved. Good. They didn't deserve to stop this. I stood across the street and watched until the roof caved in. The sky turned black. Sirens wailed too late. And everything that had been built on blood, denial, and family dinners was reduced to rubble and flame. By nightfall, the land was empty. And I was finally clean. I disappeared again. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. I changed names like gloves. Moved through cities like smoke. I stopped seeking peace. There is no peace for those who have known the truth this long. There is only stillness. And I keep it with me like a knife. Sometimes I still hear from them. Those who read my words, saw my face, recognized their own story in mine. They ask me what comes next. How to survive what they can't forget. I never answer. Because I didn't survive. I transformed. There's a difference. Survival implies safety. Continuation. A future. Transformation is violent. It leaves nothing of the old self behind. I didn't come out the other side. I incinerated the other side, and stood in the smoke until I couldn't remember what I looked like before. I'm not someone anymore. I'm aftermath. I'm what they made and what they lost. And I will never go back.